Hello. All right.
Awesome. John, we're really happy you could come, and thanks for being with us tonight. I'm going to leave it kind of facing everyone else so that you can see if someone starts jumping up and down, flailing their hands wildly, you'll know that they have a question.
Okay, great.
And then you can stop and say, oh, what's your question?
Do that.
So we know that if you guys have a question, we can stop them, right? So John is in the room right now.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm teleporting.
In the house.
Right.
So it's like he was here. You can ask him a question. You can stop. And we have a question already. Can you say it again?
Where are you?
Can you hear that?
Hello from Detroit, Michigan. All right. Can everybody hear me fine?
Yep.
Great. All right. First, thanks, Curtis, for giving me the opportunity to talk about the calendar. Just want to give everybody a little background of my own background. I grew up in Detroit. When I was 19, I moved to Mexico. Had an opportunity to study there, and for 5 months, and that 5 months turned into 11 years. So that wasn't something I was expecting, but I fell in love with the country, with the people, and especially with the culture. So today I think we're going to talk about the Mexican culture, the Mesoamerican history. I'd like to give you a high-level look at that and go a little bit into the calendar. It's a broad subject, and we certainly... Another thing, Curtis, how much time do I have?
Something like that.
25 minutes.
We want to leave like 5 minutes, 10 minutes for discussion at the end. So.
Okay.
So 10 o'clock your time.
10 o'clock. We're done with the questions and everything?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, then I'll jump right into it. I spent, well, actually since 2004, I've been studying the Mesoamerican culture, especially the calendar system. I spent 2 years living with indigenous people in Mexico in the state of Oaxaca. And that is a place really didn't open up its borders to foreigners until about 1992, 93. So it offered an unbroken chain of, let's say, information from the time of the Aztecs. And that's also a place where I noticed, Curtis, in one of your slides, you talked about syncretism between the pre-Hispanic cultures and the Catholic Church. This was a place where that took place, where that was happening at the highest degree. So really, they were using the Catholic Church, the Virgin Mary, Jesus, all these different saints as a cover for their own religion, almost in an unbroken form from before the Hispanic invasion. So that was an opportunity to really learn the culture from the horse's mouth, if you like to say it like that. But it was intense. The people there didn't wear shoes. A lot of them did not speak even Spanish. The language there is called the Mazatec language, very similar to Eastern, to Asian languages, and the people even looked Asian. So there's a lot of hypothesis that there was a migration from China to Mexico at some point. Also, obviously, from Africa, as you can see in the Olmec heads, which I believe were in the slides that Curtis showed. So just spending 2 years with these people really gave me some insight into their beliefs, and my goal is to bring those insights to our civilization, to the 21st century. So we're going to talk about that today. Before that, did you all just watch a video from Chief Seattle?
No, we did not.
You didn't see it? Okay.
No, we did the other one, though, with the signs about Tenochtitlan.
Okay. Then I'll just touch on briefly on the speech from Chief Seattle.
Thank you.
He's talking really about the difference between our civilization and the indigenous civilizations. In our civilization, we fragment everything. We cut things into pieces. There's seconds, minutes. Time is linear. We are separate from our environment, which obviously has caused a lot of problems. that we're well aware of now, especially in the last several years. So the indigenous populations did not see reality the same way. And if we're studying history, it's very important that we make the best attempt to put ourselves in their shoes. I know that's very difficult and in some ways impossible, but we can do that to the greatest extent of our ability. And these indigenous cultures, from their speeches and writings and teachings, saw themselves as a part of their environment. So they did not separate the individual from the environment. The air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the fire being a representation of electricity, which keeps us alive, the heat in our bodies. All of these elements are a part of us. So as we see on the outside, we have those same characteristics or qualities on the inside. That's what makes the human being. So the indigenous populations did not see this separation between the self and the external world, the environment. It's very important to keep that in mind as we talk about the Mayan calendar, because the whole system is based on that concept that we are our environment. We are a piece of our environment, like a cog in a wheel. We can't separate ourselves from our environment. If we had no air, we wouldn't be here. If there was no food, we wouldn't be here. If there was no water, we wouldn't be here. So we are one with our environment. Another very important concept that we're going to talk about is the cyclical nature of time. In our civilization, how do we look at time? It's linear, right? And it goes in a straight line from the present to the future. So 0, 1, 2, 3, counting. Seconds, minutes. It's also, ironically, if you look at a clock, there's a circle there. And at the top of that clock, what number's at the top of the clock? 12, right? Right? Every time we get to 12, we go back to 1. So that's just, there's a reason for that, but if you think about it, the Mayan system, the most important number in the Mayan system is the number 13. So that number isn't even in our time system. Once we get to 12, it starts over. There's a reason for that. But the most important thing to remember is, according to the Mayas and the Mesoamerican civilization, time is not linear. Time is actually spiral in nature. It's circular, but it's moving in a spiral. Similar to the shell, you've seen conch shells. That's how time is moving according to the Mayan system. So if you think about it, we all have experienced different times. If we were all to hold our breath right now for as long as we could, at first the seconds would be ticking by like normal, but after a minute or two, each second would seem like an eternity. So we can see that time contracts and expands. Time breathes. And this is a Mayan concept as well, that time is, not only is it cyclical, but time is actually breathing. I'd like to also give you, before we jump into the actual calendar, just a brief overview of the history of Mexico. Curtis, how much have you talked about the history of Mexico?
Nothing too specific about Mexico as a country, if that's what you mean.
More the Mesoamerican pre-Hispanic history.
Right.
Okay, I'll just jump right in. The Olmecs are the mother civilization of Mexico. They go back as far as 3000 BC, possibly before that. Our records say around 1500 BC they had a fully developed civilization. Pyramids. The calendar system actually did not originate with the Mayas. It originated with the Olmecs. Even though we hear all the time the Mayan calendar, it's actually an Olmec calendar. The Olmecs are the ones, did you see the slide with the large stone heads? Did you show them that, Curtis?
Yep.
That's the Olmec civilization. So you can tell that they came from across the sea. They came from Africa, or that region of the earth. So they brought from Africa to Mesoamerica this calendar system. So this is something the media doesn't talk about, and you probably haven't heard before, but the Mayan calendar system actually originated in Africa with the Olmecs. So the Olmecs, they saw their peak around 1000 BC, and then about the same time the Mayas started to flourish. The Mayas were further south in Mexico and into Central America. And at around the same time the Mayas began to flourish, the Olmecs were in the decline, and then around 0 AD they disappeared. And at that same time another civilization sprung up in Central America called the Toltecs. So out of the Olmecs you have the Toltecs in central Mexico, and you have the Mayas in southern Mexico. Now these two were sometimes warring, sometimes they got along. There was back and forth battle between them. But the Mayas really perfected the calendar system. So they took it to another level and developed what's known as the long count system. And the long count system is the calendar that pinpoints the date December 21st, 2012 as an important date. That's something that at the end of this talk I want to discuss with you, kind of cut through all the hype, because there is a lot of hype around it. But that system was developed by the Mayas, and that's why I think we call it the Mayan calendar, because usually we're talking about that end date of December 21st, 2012. After the Toltecs and the Mayas began to decline, the Aztec civilization sprang up around 1450, 1420. So if you look at the whole timeline of Mesoamerican history, from 3000 BC until the 1500s, the Aztecs represent only 100 years of, we're talking about almost 5,000 years of history. The Aztecs represent only 100 years, but 80-90% of the information that we have and the information that we hear comes from the Aztecs. Chief Seatl. Seatl is actually a Mayan day sign, one water. So his name, even though he was in Washington State, is an Aztec name. Is an Aztec day sign. The word Michigan is an Aztec word. It means the place of the fish. Michi is fish, and Can is place of. So this just gives you an idea of how far-reaching the Aztec nation, how far-reaching their influence was. It was the entire Americas. So the Aztecs really came into power around the 1400s. For 100 years, they were extremely brutal civilization. They built their empire on human sacrifices. So they convinced their own people in the city of Tenochtitlan, the video you saw, the leaders convinced them that they had to sacrifice human hearts to the sun in order that the sun would come up the next day. This was obviously a lie, and they used it to build their empire. So they were very brutal. They had mass human sacrifices, as many as 10,000 people at a time. And this is the civilization that the Spaniards encountered when they landed. When the Spaniards came... Yes, go ahead.
John,
go ahead.
Give us 1 second. The last couple sentences came out a little funny.
Okay.
Looks like just getting a little there's a fluctuation in the internet or something.
It's all good. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
So we're good.
When the Spaniards arrived, they arrived to a brutal, very powerful but brutal civilization. Fortunately or unfortunately for the Aztecs, the rest of the country did not like the Aztecs, so they joined the Spaniards in fighting against the Aztecs. So it's basically a civil war that took down the Aztec nation, and that happened in 1520. So I'm just painting that picture for you. Most of the information we have does come from Tenochtitlan, from Mexico City, from the Aztecs, but the Aztecs only represent 100 years of the total history of Mesoamerica, and that's a 5,000-year history. All right, any questions before I jump into the calendar itself?
Any questions? That all makes sense? It's all that, you've probably all heard that a million times on TV or something, right?
Was anybody surprised at the origin of the calendar?
Yep.
Did anyone know that?
I didn't. Someone said that they didn't know it came from the Olmecs.
Right, because we call it the Mayan calendar. The Mayas, they perfected it. They took it to another level. But the Tzolk'in, which is what we're going to talk about now, this is the 260-day calendar. This is the primary calendar of the Mayan calendar system. Now you have to understand, they didn't call it a calendar. And here's another fun fact for everybody. The Mayas did not even have a word for time, which sounds kind of funny. But they used, instead of time, they used words like movement and acceleration and stop and go. So they looked at time as directions, as speeding up and slowing down and going in cycles. The Mayan, the 260-day calendar is considered the hub. It's the center. If you think about a wheel on a bicycle, you have a lot of spokes, and at the center of that you have the hub. Well, if you take out one of the spokes, the bike tire still works fine. If you remove the hub, the whole thing falls apart. So the reason they used the 260-day calendar is that it was an eternal cycle. It moves without changing. So every time you go through the 260 days, it goes back to 1. Now think about how many days do we have in our current year?
How many? 365, everyone says.
And what about every 4th year?
What about every 4th year? 366.
Now who can tell me why we have a leap year?
Why?
They thought it was a good idea.
Because they thought it was a good idea.
Just for fun, right?
For funsies.
The reason that we have a leap year is because the actual solar year is 365.25 days. So that means it's a decimal. It's not exact. So that means every 4 years we have to add a year. Every single planetary cycle, the cycle of Venus, the cycle of Mars, also the solar cycles, the sun cycles, they all have decimals in them. They're not exact. So the way that the Mayas were able to develop a calendar that was so precise is by using the 260-day calendar as a way to calibrate their whole system. And when I say calibrate, I mean to order it. So instead of adding a day every 4 years, they would just stop their solar calendar every 52 years and let 13 days go by in their Zolkin calendar and then restart the calendar again. So that's one reason why it was important. There's another reason why it's important. 260 days is 9 months. And what do we know about 9 months that's very important for the human being? Gestation, right? So the 260-day calendar is the period of gestation, the time the baby is in the womb. So that's probably the most important reason that they use that calendar. And another thing that I want you to understand, in our civilization, we're given our names arbitrarily. So that means our parents pick our name. Maybe it's a grandfather, or maybe we're named after our parent, or maybe they just think of it out of the air. We don't know where those names come from. In the Mayan, and the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Aztecs, they did not operate like that. You were given the calendar name of the day you were born. So every one of those 260-day options, whatever day it was when you were born, you were given that name. Now, that helped out tremendously in communication in their civilization because everybody knew what that meant. So, for example, Curtis is 8 lizard. So there's always one of 13 numbers and one of 20 signs. So out of the 13 numbers, Curtis has the number 8, which has a specific meaning. And it's really harmonics, harmony, the octaves, cycles. And then lizard, which is a symbol, has a certain meaning. So you just have to think about how a lizard operates. It likes to be in the sun, likes to chill out, just hang out and have fun. So this is, each of us, everyone would know that when they encountered 8 lizard, which is Curtis, everybody would understand in that civilization what that meant and how to deal with him. So if we think about the 20-day signs, Curtis, do they have that printout there?
They have it, and I also have it here on the computer, so I could pull it up and we could do it on, on the big screen if you wanted.
Let's go. Yeah, let's go through the 20-day signs real quick. Starting with Sipakli. So first, while you're turning there, I'm just going to really quick. The 13 numbers represent frequencies or tones, musical tones.
It's page 2.
Is it page 2?
For us.
Starting with Sipakli. I think it's a couple pages in.
Yep.
You see?
Yep.
Okay.
That's our page 3.
Gotcha. All right. So we're going to start with Sipakli. But first of all, the 13 numbers represent an energy. So number 1 is unity. Number 2 is polarity. Number 3 is rhythm. Number 4 is measure. Number 5 is the center. 6.
And that's on a couple pages before that, right?
Yes, it should be there. Yep. 6 is balance. 7 is mystery, and so on. You guys can look at that. But all I'm saying is each one of those numbers means something. And then the signs, the symbols, describe an ecosystem or an environment. So you'll see, I'm going to just read through these. We'll go through these quickly. Number 1 is Cipacli, which is the Aztec name for crocodile. Number 2 is wind, which is a Hecatl. Number 3 is Kali, which is temple. Number 4 is Kan, which is lizard. Number 5, Coatl, which is snake. Number 6, Mikisli, death. Number 7, Mazatl, which is deer. Number 8, Tochli, rabbit. Number 9 is Atl, water. Number 10 is Itzcuintli, and that's dog, Ak. Ozomatli is 11, and that's monkey. Number 12 is Malinali, which is the path or grass. Number 13 is Acatl, which is corn. That's my day sign. Number 14 is Ocelotl, which is jaguar. 15 is Cuautli, which is eagle. 16, Coscacuautli, which is vulture. 17 is Olin, which is movement. 18, Tecpatl, the stone knife. 19 is Kiahuitl, which is storm. And 20 is Xochitl, which is sun. So if you look at all those signs, first of all, you see there's all the elements. There's air, fire, which is the 19th Kiahuitl. You have earth, which is the jaguar, and water, which is Atl. But you also have Olin. In the Mayan system, they have 5 elements. The 5th element is Olin, which is movement, which makes all the other elements alive, which gives them life. The other thing you see, you have some predators in this list. You have the jaguar and the eagle. And you also have some docile animals like the rabbit and the deer. So you can see in an ecosystem, if you have a jaguar together with a deer, they might not get along. And this is just a very an example of how the Mayan calendar works. When you have a deer confronting a jaguar, it would be normally in nature, it would obviously be frightened, because a jaguar could possibly eat that deer. But then you also have corn, and the deer eat the corn. So you might have a problem between corn people and deer people. So this is just an example of how their ecosystem worked, how they treated the calendar as an ecosystem. And this is a way that we can apply the Mayan calendar today. Because really, what are we here talking about? If we're just talking about history, it's better that you guys all read it somewhere in a book. I think the most important thing about studying history is applying it to the present moment. Any questions so far?
Got a lot of big eyes.
Go ahead.
I have a question though. Can you hear that?
Yes. How do you know what's your number? Curtis has a program on the computer, AztecCalendar.com. There's quite a few, but that's the best one I've found. So, Curtis, you're going to go ahead and help them get their day signs, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that we can, if you have the possibility, maybe at the end we can look up 1 or 2 people's day signs.
Yeah, I'll send it around right now.
Great. All right, so we talked about the 20 signs.
Do you need the time of birth also?
What's that?
Do we need the
time of birth? No, just the birth date.
Birth date?
Yep. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the long count calendar that the Mayas invented or perfected. The Mayan system, you know, we use what's called the decimal counting system, which means our count goes from 10 to 100 to 1,000, 10,000. It moves by tens. The Mayan system is what's called a base 20 system. So instead of moving by tens, it moves by 20s. So it goes from 200 to 400 to 8,000 to 160,000 to 3.2 million, 64 million, and then 1.28 billion, and so on. So it's an exponential system. So the reason they used a base 20 system is that they were dealing with very, very long periods of time, billions and billions of years. And they were able to not only deal with that, but they were able to track those periods of time. And they calculated that in December 21st, 2012, that would be a transformation of a period of time of 16.4 billion years. So we're talking, and that's part of the reason why there's hype around that day, because we're talking about an evolutionary period of 16.4 billion years that will come to culmination at the end of this year. Now,
so does that make sense, everybody? Everyone get that?
This year.
He said this year. He said this year. He said talking about this year. We got. I mean, what about that? Say it again.
The Mayas, the long count system that the Mayas originated, talks about the end of the calendar or the beginning of a new calendar on December 21st of 2012. That's all the hype around. I don't know if you guys have heard. There's a movie 2012. There's been a lot of hype out there about this end of the calendar and what does it mean. Well, according to the Maya, this is an evolutionary period. It's the end of an evolutionary period of 16.4 billion years. Now, what does that mean for us? We don't know. Nobody knows. One thing that the Mayas did predict, and they have writings that took place in the 1600s after the Spaniards arrived, but they made predictions based on their calendar for this time, and they predicted that we would unify, the whole earth would unify. Now, they made that prediction for the last 20 years, which started in 1992 to 2012. Now, what happened in the last 20 years that may have unified the earth? Anyone have a clue? Maybe the internet? What about cell phones? So these are all things that were predicted by the Mayas hundreds of... What about Skype? Right. So these predictions took place hundreds of years ago for this time period. Obviously, they didn't necessarily see the technology. They didn't know that there would be such a thing as an internet or cell phones. But the prediction based on what they were reading in the stars was that the earth would unite. The entire earth would unite as one. They also predicted that it would be a time of war, of destruction. That's what we're seeing. I mean, all we got to think about is Japan last year and the tsunami in 2004 and these type of events that are taking place. So they predicted that, but I think the hype and what I want to kind of cut through is, the talk about the end of the world. There's a lot of talk that the Mayas predicted that 2012 would be the end of the world. That's not true. It's actually the reverse. The prediction, or what they believed, is that this would be the time of birth. This would actually be the time that a new world was born, or a new human was born. So a new, maybe form, we don't know. We don't know what it would look like, but part of that is the unification of the earth that's taking place through the internet and through cell phones and through technology. It's actually creating a different reality. And this is something that was predicted hundreds of years ago by the Mayas using the calendar. So, any questions up to this point? I know it's a lot of information. It's very high level. But again, the most important thing, there you go. What does it say?
You got birth dates.
Birth dates. Okay, yeah. The most important thing is really applying it. So why don't we take a few examples, starting with the one that asked the question first.
What was that?
That was...
Oh, yeah. June 30th, 82. 6/30/82.
You got the Aztec? You got the calendar there?
I had...
I can do it.